We are continuing to follow breaking news. The New York Jets have a new head coach. It's Aaron Glenn, according to our NFL insider, Jonathan Jones. The 52-year-old was one of the hottest names on the market during this cycle after a wildly successful run as the defensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. He is also a former player for the Jets who drafted him 12th overall back in 1994. Glenn has his work cut out for him, though. The Jets, as we all know, have the longest playoff drought in the league at 14 years and counting, so obviously top of mind is making sure this New York Jets team can get back to the postseason at the very least. Aaron Glenn, a former Jet. We also have a former Jet here on set as we bring in our Leger Douzable and Pete Prisco to discuss.
Not a former Jet.
Not a former Jet. He doesn't have that distinction, but he still brings us great info out of the NFL. Leger, I do want to come to you first here because, as I mentioned to JJ, this doesn't really feel like a surprise when you look at the history, the connections, the success that Aaron Glenn has had. But as a former player, how do you feel about the hire?
Jet Nation, we got our guy, right? And you alluded to it, right? And me and Pete have had this discussion. I think that the Jets had to bring somebody in that knows what it means to be a Jet, that would love this job, because he was drafted as a first-round pick for the New York Jets. He was an all-pro for the New York Jets, and from everybody that I've talked to, he touted this job more than anybody because of the history that he had coming in as a former New York Jet. And when you look at it, you hear people throw around the words leader of men, but that really kind of embolds who Aaron Glenn is. I just go back to the Hard Knocks clip where Dan Campbell had him talk not only in front of the players, but the coaching staff and the front office people. And I've never seen a room so more engaged. Like, he commands the room, and that's something that the Jets needed. So to me, this was a home run pick. Now, the biggest question will be, Pete, is as he fills out his staff, who's going to be the offensive coordinator? Who's going to be the defensive coordinator? I think JJ made a really good point earlier saying that maybe he gets a guy like Steve Wilks as a defensive coordinator, a guy that has head coaching experience, because Aaron Glenn doesn't have head coaching experience. And I think that is important to have somebody on staff that has been in the shoes that you've been in to kind of help you as you get ready to take on this role as head coach. But ultimately, I thought this was a home run hire, but it's going to come down to his staff.
He was feisty as a player. He wasn't a big player, but he was always a battler. And I think that's what the Jets are going to get with Aaron Glenn. He's going to stand up there, and he's going to tell them, look, we're going to be tough. We're going to be physical. That Jets defense that didn't tackle last year, they're going to tackle next year. Going forward, that's what they're going to do. And he will instill that in him. I love this hire for the Jets. Again, though, we sit here every go-around. We say, we love this guy, we love that guy.
We judge them 6 weeks into the season.
You never really know until they handle their business, and will they allow outside distractions to bother them. You know, being an assistant coach is an entirely different situation to being a head coach. You have so many people coming at you from so many different directions, and a lot of coaches get bogged down. They just want to be football coaches. Well, you don't have to. You have to be a lot more than that now. You got to be a babysitter of sorts. You got to be a father of sorts. You got to do a lot of things. You got to mold them. You got to lead them, and so it's a challenge. That's why we sit here. We say it sounds like a good hire, but until you get there, we never really know.
Well, and right up the road, Gerard Mayo, a perfect example of that, right? Where you and I had this conversation about how excited we were and how good of a fit he was, and we saw how that sort of ended up. If we think about that, though, there's so many questions on this Jets team, right? That playoff drought is what we keep coming to. But I think the bigger question, Leger, is who the heck is going to play quarterback next year, right? And so if you're Aaron Glenn, how do you approach that situation?
Well, first and foremost, the Jets need to get their GM in place, right?
That too, add it to the list.
It seems like it's going to be Lance Newmark, who actually has a working relationship with Aaron Glenn. Let's not forget, before he was a #2 guy with the Commanders, he spent 20+ years with the Detroit Lions. So he's been there with Aaron Glenn. So I think that's important that the GM and head coach have a working relationship in the past and are going to be on the same page. So when you talk about personnel decisions, like, they have to get the GM first, Haley, before they can make those decisions. So it'll be ultimately up to whoever the Jets hire. And again, from all intents and purposes, looks like it will be GM Lance Newmark and Aaron Glenn. They'll come together, make that decision to see, will Aaron Rodgers be on this team, or will they go in a different direction?
Yes, Pete. Aaron Rodgers is the GM of this team.
Well, he has been the last couple of years, but if they don't solve the quarterback position, Aaron Glenn and Newmark will be fired in 3 or 4 years. That's the bottom line. That's the reality of the NFL. They have to address the quarterback position. They have to fix it. If you don't fix it, you're going to get fired. You can't win in this league. I don't care how good you are. You're not winning if you don't consistently if you don't have a quarterback. So how do they address it? What do they do with Aaron Rodgers? Aaron Rodgers actually played pretty good football down the stretch, but he's 40. And so at some point, you got to figure out what you're going to do. but there's not a lot out there on the market.
Yeah.
They're not in a position to draft one. So how do they get a quarterback? How do they fix it? It's a real challenge when you don't have a quarterback.
And we saw that from the Antonio Pierce, right, and the Vegas Raiders. Like, he wasn't actually given an opportunity to have their franchise guy. And if you don't have a franchise guy, like Pete talked about, you have no chance in the league. Like, Robert Saleh turned that defense from the 31st ranked defense to a perennial top 5 defense, but it doesn't matter if you don't get the quarterback position right. So, again, it's going to come down to whoever the new GM is, also Aaron Glenn, to make sure they find a bridge guy that they trust, and then maybe, you know, try to trade back or maybe even move up into the late first round or early second round to maybe get a quarterback in the future if they feel like there's one that they really like.
Where do you go, though? Okay, let's just say Rodgers isn't playing. He doesn't play. Where do you go?
I like Tyrod Taylor. He's under contract already. I mean, the history with him as a bridge guy, the young guys behind him have actually planned out really well. So if you take a Jackson Dart maybe in the top of the second round and have him be the young guy behind Tyrod Taylor, I think that could make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I don't think you solve it by that, though. I just don't. I think they have to. And
I mean, but like you said, where else would they go?
You're in no man's land.
That's what I'm saying.
You're in no man's land.
But it feels like maybe that could be helped, like some of these decisions if they had a GM in place. And I know that that continues to be a talking point here, like hiring a GM. But Pete, I come to you on this, like, where do you go? Who's the right man in charge? Who's going to help make these decisions?
I think Newmark is the right guy.
Correct.
And everybody I've talked to around the league about him, and I don't know him, but everybody I've talked to around the league and people I trust say he's a real deal. He is it. And look, Bobby Beathard, longtime general manager, scout in this league, well respected. He started with Bobby Beathard. That's a long time ago. He's been doing this a long time without a lot of fanfare. He wasn't always one of those guys that was on those lists.
Correct.
You know, guys get on the list and they start to become the hot name, and usually they don't work out. Well, this guy's actually come up through the ranks as a football personnel guy and highly respected among football personnel guys. Doesn't play the game, but highly respected. And so I think he's actually, if he is the hire, he's the right hire.
And to that point, right, he went through the ups and downs with the Detroit Lions. When you talk about building it the right way, right, and then Adam Peters saw that this guy can come help me out, and you saw what the Washington Commanders did with that roster in 1 year, turning it around. So I think Lance Newmark makes a lot of sense. Again, I talk about it. He has a working relationship already with Aaron Glenn, and he's been there when the Lions were at the bottom of the league, and he helped turn that thing around.
Lance Newmark, no stranger to the NFL, to both of your points. 28 years of NFL experience, including 26 of those with the Detroit Lions. So obviously it's going to be important to get leadership in place. Leger, as our resident Jet on set here, is it more important for you, I guess, when we're looking at what a successful first year looks like under Aaron Glenn, is it more important to have like a Commanders-like season where, you know, they have just blown all? But to my point, like I think with the Commanders, we had no expectations for them, and here they are playing in a conference championship. So what does success look like for Aaron Glenn, specifically Aaron Glenn in that role?
To me, it's not record-based, it's culture-based and what they look like on the field. And that's the one thing people could say, yes, the record for the Commanders looks a lot different, but the way they play on the field looks a lot different, right? When you bring in a guy like Nick Allegretti, who has Super Bowl experience, you bring in a guy like Bobby Wagner, who has Super Bowl experience. Like, those are some of the moves the Jets have to make. Now, again, they're not going to have as much money as the Commanders, and also the Commanders picked 2 overall. So I don't want to say they were gifted, Jaden Daniels, but sometimes you have to be bad enough to be able to pick your quarterback of the future, and the Jets aren't in that position right now. So first and foremost, to me, it's the culture change. They have to change the culture of what it means to be a Jet, and that's why I think Aaron Glenn makes the most sense, because he's lived that life. He's been in that locker room. He's been in that field, so he knows what it means to be a Jet. They have to change the culture there.
It's interesting, though. You look at the division, okay? Right now, the Bills, better shape, much better shape. New England has Drake May, better shape. Miami, if Tua's on the field, they're in better shape.
If he's on the field.
If he's on the field. So you look at Aaron Glenn, the situation he's walking into, he's facing a challenge. That's a big challenge. You don't think so?
I would just say, when you look at, if you were to go to team and you look at the frontline players, who has better frontline players than the Jets, though? When you talk about young future talent, like the foundation of the team.
For example, you're talking about Garrett Wilson and
Breece Hall.
Breece didn't do much this year.
Sauce Gardner.
I mean, he didn't play very well this year.
I'm just saying, those are three players that any team would take.
You're talking about 2 of those players who didn't play expectations
yesterday. I mean, my goodness.
But if the quarterback position is solved in New England, that changes the dynamic of that entire team, and that's the advantage. If you ask me right now, if I was becoming Mike Vrabel or Aaron Glenn, I could become the coach of the Jets Jets with their talent, or the coach of the Patriots with Drake May, I'd rather coach Drake May.
Because you got the quarterback.
Yes.
And
So
they got
then
a
what does
boatload of
success
money.
look like for Aaron Glenn this year? I mean, how do we measure
I think
that?
he
Because I
makes
don't
a
want to
good
be
point
having
about
the same
changing culture.
conversation.
We saw them quit. They went to Arizona this year and they quit the second half of that game, and that can't happen. I don't care how bad it is, it can't happen. Aaron Glenn will change that. That much can change.
Yeah.
He can instill his culture, his toughness, his physical style, no quitting. That will happen. Offensively, unless the quarterback position's fixed, you have no idea what that's going to be.
Yeah, it's obviously, like I said, top of mind. There's just so many things to think about if you're the Jets, and they have their own set of problems. But if we flip this and look at the other side here, the Detroit Lions just went from being on top of the world, and then they lose in a year that they were expected to win the Super Bowl. And not only do they lose the game, but they lose their two coordinators, their top two coordinators there. How do they recover, Pete? How do they bounce back?
Well, look, it's all about Jimmys and Joes.
No question.
And I said this to somebody the other day. I said, you'd rather have, no offense to Aaron Glenn, but you'd rather have Aiden Hutchinson and Aleem McNeil on the field and not have Aaron Glenn than have Aaron Glenn and not have those two guys.
Without a doubt.
So they get healthy. That's how they fix it. And you know, Kelvin Shepard's sitting there. He might be a guy offensively. They have people in the building they really like as potential offensive coordinators. I think they'll be fine from that standpoint. Look, coaches are one thing, it's players. And coaches can really elevate the good players and make them better. But if you don't have players, we saw that. Aaron Glenn, look, he fought a real challenge to try and stop Jaden Daniels in that playoff game because he didn't have any players. I don't care who you are as a coach. If you don't have the players, it's going to be tough. So I think they'll be okay if they get the guys back.
To double down on it, they said you can have all the X's and O's you want, but if you don't have the Jimmy and the Joes, it doesn't matter. And we saw this play out just a few years ago with the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, again, that team kind of struggled down the stretch, but they started off 10-1 and still went to the playoffs. So when you talk about the personnel that the Lions have, they will be fine.
They will. Leger, I'm going to give you one last moment here. Your team has their coach. I'm sure the GM will be coming shortly, and then we'll have that draft where the Jets pick 7th overall. I need you to give Jets Nation a message right now that everything is coming together.
I mean, it's a homecoming for a guy that was drafted in the first round, a guy that was all-pro there. To Pete's point, like, before Darrelle Revis, Aaron Glenn was the corner that everybody looked up to with the Jets. He's an undersized guy that was scrappy at the line of scrimmage, would get hands on you. He was feisty. He had that tenacity, and I think that's what has been missing in this Jets locker room. And I think he'll bring that energy just because he knows what it means to wear the green and white. He's prideful of it, and it means a lot to him. So, again, to Pete's point, we don't know until he actually becomes a head coach and puts his staff together, and we see what he can do with his staff. But I'm very excited about this hire right now.
Well, Jets, baby.
Jets.
There you go.
There we go.
I know I get him
Jets
going.
and the Orlando Magic from Jacqueline. We've got too much songs going on here at CBS Sports HQ. But as you heard, Leger very excited. The New York Jets officially have their man, and it is Aaron Glenn. He takes over for Robert Saleh. So a lot of problems Aaron Glenn will be taking on in that role, but we are excited to see what he can do at the next level. Of course, Ben Johnson also introduced earlier today as he takes over the Chicago Bears. I'm just waiting to see who my Cowboys are going to hire because I don't know how I feel about Brian Schottenheimer.